Okay, everybody, it looks like it's about that time, and hopefully right now you're seeing our do's and don'ts of virtual audit slide. Just wanted to thank everyone for registering and joining. Just a couple of introductions first, so you know who we are on the webinar here today. My name is John Weber. I'm president with GForce Life Sciences. GForce Life Sciences is a consulting firm that matches highly targeted consultants and auditors to executives' needs in the life sciences space. So what we traditionally do is we blend the best of some different models that you've probably experienced in the past when bringing in talented consultants. We blend the speed, experience, and we provide a targeted search, as you've seen from different firms. So we try to bring you what you ask for as opposed to what's available on our bench. And GForce does this in 4 different ways. We do this with traditional teams and individual subject matter experts. We also can act as a functional service provider, often done in an SOW fashion. We have an executive search division that works on full-time placement of director level and above professionals. And obviously the reason that we're all here today is we do also have a global auditing division, and we're capable of conducting well over 1,000 audits per year, on-site, remotely, or virtually, I guess is the term these days. So we do that in the pharma space, biotech, medical devices, and diagnostics, among others. And also today, joining me is Kashyap Malkin. And Kashyap is principal of Malkin Solutions, and they conduct audits, they perform training, certifications for clients globally. So some of the solutions he provides in the life sciences industry are things that he can assist in setting up sourcing, supplier quality programs, managing quality of purchased products. He can improve or optimize production or process quality, resolve any sort of issue you have, and he also has managed recalls in the past. So we're going to chat with Kashyap today, and we're talking about a lot of things that we've seen and done when it comes to virtual audits versus a traditional desktop audit. And that's why we wanted to share our best practices, because we know it's top of mind for many of you. So today's topic, the do's and don'ts of virtual audits, it's generated a lot of interest from our clients and our consulting network. I believe we have over 300 people on here today, which is great. And like I mentioned earlier, welcome, and we're glad to have you. We hope you pick up a thing or two during our session. But of course, there's no denying that the pandemic has forced companies to change the way we're doing business now and for the foreseeable future. But it's still necessary for each organization to ensure that their suppliers continue to provide services and materials that are fit for purpose and in compliance with quality expectations. GXP audits, they've got to continue to verify that organizations comply with these processes and guidelines, regardless of whether we can travel or not. So even though we have these stay-at-home mandates, or we're not traveling to different regions or nations, we've got social distancing requirements in place as well. It's prevented us from doing a lot of on-site audits, so we wanted to share this with you. I will say that the health authorities have helped a little bit. For example, the FDA has been as part of their MDSAP, they provided some guidance for performing virtual audits. And from our experience, we've seen that the concepts are also adaptable to the pharma and biologic audits of API facilities or CMOs, and even supplier and distributor audits. So that's just a little bit, that's our intro. I do have 2 housekeeping items I want to mention to you. Number 1, as a reminder, this is being recorded, so if you have to drop before our hour is up, no harm, no foul. We will send a copy of this recording to anyone that's registered. So that will be on its way in the coming days. The other item that I wanted to tell you about is that on the right side of your screen should be a Q&A bar where you can actually enter in questions that we have a moderator, Kelly Brubach, is moderating for us. So she'll review them and post them. And we want this to be as beneficial to you as possible. So if someone on this session posts a question, and if you think that's a good idea and you'd like to hear the answer to that as well, just like it. It's a way of upvoting, and what we're going to do is we're going to select the most popular questions, and Cash App will answer those as we go along through the session today. So with that, let's jump right in. Let me introduce Cash App here, and Cash App, it's been quite a year. You've been performing audits for years, as we all know. And other than seeing your family a lot more this year, how has this year been different?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I understand we have lots of people joining in live, or eventually will join in live from all over the world. So wanted to wish everybody a greeting, and then as well, my housekeeping stuff before I answer your question, John, is I do tend to speak fast, so I'll remind myself to slow down and pause. I'll ask my moderators to give me the sign if I'm talking really fast. So having said that, getting to the stuff, hey, when before the pandemic hit, life was going on as usual. We were doing audits, we were conducting trainings for ISO 1345, 9000. People were attending classes, people were going to school, my kids were going to school. So it was life as usual. And then all of a sudden, with mandated stay-at-home orders or quarantines or curfews, depending on which part of the world you were in, things just shut down. Once that happened, it was very evident that the world returning to its normalcy would take time, and then also develop a different way of doing things. So, we at Malkin Solutions, in partnership with GForce, spend a decent amount of time updating our understanding of technology, and specifically how we can continue business in the training, auditing, and consulting space, and do that remotely. Companies have moved to virtual collaborations for doing regular work. Schools have gone to remote schools. It was only natural to move to how do we do audits virtually. And just virtual audits is not new. If anybody's had a WhatsApp video call or a FaceTime call, it's very similar in its culture that goes with it, I want to say, than technology. Virtual audits are not about technology. They're about more so a different way of doing things. So that changed. So we developed or enhanced rather over the pandemic a lot of that capability, implemented it, trained on it, and then of course, provided that to our clients. So it's been a different wave in the last 6 months of how we conduct business overall.
Great. Thank you for that. So why don't we just jump right in, and I think the good way to break it up would maybe to talk a little bit about what we do before an audit in terms of our preparation. So with that, the way we've set this up is I have some slides that, there we go, technical difficulty. So the first question that we have for you is, what are the prerequisites needed from the client to conduct an audit?
So, a lot of these, I'm sure the attendee audience is varying in nature of their understanding of audits. We are talking about quality system audits, or audits that are conducted in a manufacturing floor. These are quite different than your finance audits or any other type of assessments that are conducted. We do a lot of SMETA audits, which are social, ethical, environmental in nature. We do credibility audits. So we, in this particular case, we're going to specifically talk about manufacturing audits, or audits of manufacturing processes or some level of manufacturing. And then based on that, we reference a lot of 19011 standards for ISO for auditing guidelines. So not changing the way or what we do audits, essentially the medium of virtual audits changes. And to accommodate that in a prerequisite world of audits, you have to do a few things differently. it's the same things that are done, and it sounds mundane when I say, well, before an audit, you have to, get the auditee information, contact them, send out an agenda, get your pre-required documents as agreed by the disclosure agreements up front, understand the scope of the audit, get the material from the client of what they feel that needs to be audited to define scope. So these are all done prior. They might have been done in-person meetings with, if you are within your organization, you might contact your stakeholders, ask them, hey, what do you want me to audit? Or I'm going to company X to visit them for their blank manufacturing process. What would you like to do? And the stakeholders in that case would provide you some level of information. Now you'd have to do that via a virtual meeting, and I shy away from using specific names like Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Google Meet, because every company has their flavor. So it's nothing specific. The medium is just virtual in its nature. So one of those things, I'll use a very specific example. So when we go to a production audit of any particular process, understanding what technologies we'll encounter is kind of key, especially in end product. If it's a med device, it's a test method, it's a specialty process. So understanding that is key. When imagine you are in your own company or at a client's company, you can walk their floor, look at the finished product, understand what it is that we will be encountering at the auditee's location. You can get a visual, touch, feel sense of what you're looking for. On a virtual call, you can't do that. Even if I showed you my fantastic device like this one, you can't see how big it is, you can't feel the metal, you can't feel what it does. Also, you don't get that perception. So things are quite different. So maybe the virtual person is, explaining a lot more. Maybe they're defining terms. You're reading a lot more schematics. I think that's the pre work that's done quite differently. Historically, if I had to use some numbers, pre-audit for one day might be 1 or 2 hours of pre-work on the auditor's part to prepare. Now we are finding that goes up to 4 to 6 hours of preparation, because getting the right documents and organizing them, getting them, making sure that you have the right versions. It's a little bit of a back and forth. There's a lot of follow-up involved. People are not used to sharing documents or sharing knowledge virtually as easily as they are used to sharing it in person or in a meeting or on a job floor. So the culture changes, more importantly, and the prep becomes a little more longer than as in a prior world. But you're still doing the same thing. You're still sending out the agenda. You're still defining scope, all of that stuff that goes with the prerequisites.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here we are hosting a webinar, and I'm trying to control the screen, all the screens here and the windows I have popped up. This would be a good next.
John, you muted yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties here. Self-directed, of course. So I'm busy trying to manage the technology here, and this is a perfect slide for this. So what is the biggest difference that first time auditees and auditors realize in a virtual audit?
Well, so now we are going to go talk a little, that leads a little bit into that culture concept I was talking about. What I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but that kind of proves a point. Somebody is trying to say something and they're on mute. They have to repeat themselves. Sometimes the connections are not, connectivity is not as good, especially if we are talking about global teams here. It is very important to understand that not everybody has the same infrastructure when it comes to connectivity, consistency of connectivity, and of course, speed of connectivity. Some of us are spoiled by high-speed multi-gig connections or 1 gig connections, and there are places in this I'm sure there are attendees that are viewing this that cannot attend live because of the lack of that high speed. So those cultural changes, I call them, in the medium of virtual audits makes a big difference, and that doesn't come about until you experience it first time. And that brings about a decent amount of getting used to it and planning for it. So I'm going to take this moment and say a lot of what I'm going to discuss is either my personal experiences, Malkin Solution team members' personal experiences, and more importantly, our clients. We've learned this through working for other people and during their projects. We had an example where something simple like when the video was, 2 seconds lagged to the audio, or the other way around, where the audio was 2 seconds after the video. So it's very hard to communicate. And is it impossible to conduct the work at that point? No, it's not. You just have to plan for it. You have to have patience to ask the question, could you please repeat that? So that takes a little bit of getting used to. For an auditor, though, the biggest thing is timing all of this. What would normally take a conversation to just ask a question and get a response, now you have to factor in, say, a 5-10% variation in how long you take to communicate. Sometimes you have to wait for an answer, between the lag across the world. Sometimes you have to wait for somebody to restate what they just said because it was not clear. So these are some of those things that individuals will see a big difference on when you're doing virtual audits. That's one thing. Notorious examples here. When you are sitting in front of somebody, you can see them, looking at you. You can watch them play on their phone, and they stop, etc. When you're looking at a computer screen, 80% of people are multitasking. They have multiple monitors open. They're looking at, something else. Their attention is not 100% on what you're doing. So planning for that, believe it or not, is part of the audit prep for the virtual auditors. We do spend a little bit of time within our own team training our auditors to politely but firmly have people pay attention. As soon as I said that, I noticed my own team started paying attention. So these are small things, but time management becomes key, and then keeping things going along also becomes key. Again, it's the medium that's changing, and people that experience it for the first time just take a little time getting used to it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know how to use my mute button, so I unmuted myself in a timely fashion there. Okay, so keep those questions coming. I see a few of them coming in. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. Let's again pre-work. What's the pre-work needed around reviewing and signing an NDA?
Okay, that comes up quite a bit because so as an auditor, you are the face, you are the individual, you are the physical presence, or rather in this case, virtual presence in front of another company, another group of people. Both have to be very clear what they are allowed to talk about and not allowed to talk about, and see and not see, etc. For the people on the phone, on the webinar, NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. It also could mean a CDA, confidentiality agreement, or any sort of agreement that represents do's and don'ts of what you can or cannot talk about, do, or the ramifications of violating, privacy, security, secrecy, confidentiality, etc. So, obviously, I'm not a legal expert, nor do I claim to be, none of this is considered as legal advice. But it's important that it is, as an auditor, auditee, client, and all the companies involved have clear understanding of what is it supposed to be that we can or cannot talk about, can or cannot see. That's usually covered in an NDA. In a very broad stroke, most of the time it says, don't talk about this stuff unless, and if you do, you are in big trouble. But in our case, we are talking about virtual land, right? Where we are recording this webinar. Everything behind me is in video camera range. So that's something that you as a person that is new to this might not be aware, that your conference room you're calling in from, or your shop floor has a whiteboard in the back with some confidential information. So it's very important both you as the auditee are very aware of what you can show. The auditor, they have to make sure that they only are sticking to the scope of their audit. It's very essential they do that. And then the non-disclosure agreement, or the NDA, clearly can spell out what can or cannot, or how, more importantly, can or cannot these audits be conducted. These could involve, taking snapshots of your screen. It could involve, recording of the video that is or is not something they are allowed to do when you are doing a virtual session, because having that upfront clarity is very important, and it also helps drive consistent understanding between the parties.
Perfect. There's always something in those contracts. So let me ask you this: who does these virtual audits, and how are they qualified?
So going back to, we are going to consistently stay with trained auditors. Trained is defined in our space as somebody that is accredited through the IAS or equivalent accreditation body. They have some level of accredited certifications. This could be ASQ CQA cert, ISO 9000 or 13485 cert, or the relevant standard they're auditing to. So that does not ever change. Then after that, it's the engagement with our client. What are they looking for? Are they looking for somebody that's got some level of auditing experience, whether it be 2 years out of college to 25 years out, somebody that is looking at a particular process. Injection molding might be their specialty, and they need to look at something. So that is defined in the client contract of what they require their auditor to be able to do. Then for a virtual one, internally, we do internal auditor virtual training of how do we manage audits virtually. This is very similar than if somebody is a CQA, they went through learning certified quality auditor through ASQ. It's understanding, doing an opening meeting, doing a sign-in sheet. All of that, yes, we still do that. The only difference is you got to do it virtually. Example is we did a attendee list of all the attendees. It's a sign-in, as opposed to the sign-in based on maybe your paper sign-in. These auditors, we work with them to train them specifically to understand technology. We just talked about some of the first aha moments that they have to go through with the auditee or the participants of learning technology, where the mute button is. Sorry to use that example, John, but those are things that don't come natural. And believe it or not, we work with, geez, I don't use the technology names, but when you use Skype, Meet, Google Meet, WebEx, Zoom, the buttons are unfortunately placed all over that screen. You got to figure that out. It takes a little bit of time. So being familiar with the technology is very key. So we work with technology familiarity. We actually do spend time with the client and the auditee to set them up ahead of the audit on the technology as well. And the auditor does all this, and that's some of the extra training that goes with, in addition to the accreditation as well as the process experience.
Yeah, I think that kind of answered our next question too, from the different competencies for virtual auditors. You'd certainly need someone that's a little more tech savvy or been trained in it rather than throwing them in there cold, right?
Absolutely, yeah, that it did answer that. Sorry, I seem to have read ahead, but I want to add one more point here. A lot of our med device standards, such as 13485, 9000, 14001, we are moving to a lot of what is called risk-based analysis and risk-based auditing. So when let's just use a real scenario. Client asks us, hey, we would like you to conduct these 5 audits in these different 5 regions. Our first question back is, well, what kind of auditors or competencies would you like in these auditors? And let's say for the heck of this discussion, we are using remote auditors. The usual answer is, yep, they need to be certified, accredited auditors. And that sounds good until we ask them a question. Okay, these audits you're conducting, what level of risk do they pose to your organization? I mean, we've done audits where it's a due diligence audit and a company is deciding to purchase or not purchase a company based on our report. We have audits that are, hey, can you just go and make sure that there is actually an actual facility over there and nothing else needs to be looked at, just that they are actually in that particular location and they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, like having manufacturing going on. And those are also simple audits. So the competency varies, but the risk to the organization based on the decision varies. And it helps us assess what kind of auditor do we want to assign to some of these audits. It's very important to line that up. If they're doing, like the first example, a due diligence audit to acquire a company, the level of understanding, maturity, confidentiality for the auditor is very paramount compared to maybe somebody that's just going to check out whether the doors are still open and they're still in the shop they claim to be. So we ask that risk-based analysis be used to comply and get us the right auditors for the right jobs.
Perfect. Let's ask you one more, and then I think we'll go to Kelly after this for there are definitely some questions coming in here from the group. What does the auditee have to do differently for virtual audits?
Now we'll do this is a big do question. Okay, this is when we say do's and don'ts. One of the things we ask our auditee to do is to practice. It sounds very silly, but imagine you are doing a virtual walkthrough with your auditor on your device, laptop, smartphone. You're walking through your shop floor. Can you imagine what you look like to all the people within your own shop floor? Some random guy with a camera, phone, walking around, that feels different, right? Usually most companies have no smartphones on the shop floor, no requirements, or no use of AV devices, etc., no recordings. And here you are now in this virtual world trying to do a virtual walkthrough. Sure, you might be the employee of that company. It does show a difference in culture. So making sure you communicate that with the auditee, and the auditee in turn communicates that within the organization that, hey, we will be doing a virtual audit, is very important. And the practice part comes in when, most manufacturing floors might not have cell phone reception. Maybe the data reception and connectivity is not consistent across everywhere. So having a dry run might not be a bad idea. Going back to time management that we talked about, during the audit, if we have scheduled 30 minutes for a virtual walkthrough for the plant, and we are spending 15 minutes just going in and out of connectivity because your video is not working on the transmission end, then we do lose time. So it's very important that we set those auditees up. And then we also advise redundancy. Do's is have more than one person set up. That device that you set up the day before, chances are you're going to forget to charge it. It's no different than my kids forgetting to charge their iPads right before a test. That's going to happen. So might as well charge a second one, or have somebody else also have the same knowledge or competency, because it is a pandemic. You never know who falls sick when. So it is very important that you have some level of knowledge and virtual knowledge and data transfer of the how-to beforehand when you do one of these.
Yeah. Well, I'd say with my 3 kids, that's pretty strategic of them to not have their iPad or laptop charged before a test. I think that's kind of a common trend among us parents. So good. I actually am going to ask you one more question because I think it might answer one of the questions that we have out there. How is documentation shared during virtual audits?
So So in the old way, I call it pre-pandemic way, we would ask a client to send us all their pre-work documents, we used to call it. And it could be an email back, or it could be some level of, I've had an auditee send me a printed overnight FedEx package of 400 pages printed out. We did not appreciate that one, by the way. If you're on this call, please don't do that. But once you are in the audit, the key is the way the normal audit would go, as most people that have done one would identify. You'd ask for something and say, can you please show me the procedure, the record, or evidence that this particular task or process is occurring? And normally the auditee would then produce a paper folder copy, or maybe if you're in their conference room, pull it up on their electronic ECFR Part 11 compliance system of what you're asked for. In our space, when you're virtually doing this and you have to ask for multiple documents, we normally ask that you put them in a shared drive, like Google Drive or Box or Dropbox, where they are organized by what we are talking about, or what the agenda item is. It helps the auditor keep track of what information they are receiving. It also is very important that one version of the document show up in that document location, because one of the requirements in most of the ISO standards is to have documentation control. If you have revision 6 of the document and a revision 7 of the same document in that folder, right there's some level of document mix-up. And this is, of course, compounded by the fact that multiple people in an audit environment are contributing to this. You might have a back room of people working on providing documents. You might have a front room where they are talking to the auditor. So it can get a little chaotic. And believe it or not, on the receiving end as the auditor, you got to keep all this straight. You got to ask the right questions, make sure you got the right information in front of you. And your job becomes good document management and say, okay, I've reviewed this file, this information, this particular record, and notate that down, because as soon as that's done, 5 other things might show up and you will forget. So sharing through electronic medium seems to help. I would not advise, my don't on this one would be, do not try to do email, because you as the auditor will not be able to keep up on the different people emailing you the same thing in different versions. Some might send you 5 files that by the time you get through it, somebody sent you one of those files separately, somebody sent you another explanation, and it totally went off on a tangent. It's like 5 people talking to you at the same time in the conference room. Does not work. So stick with something that's central, where everybody else can also see what was provided, and then don't try to do email.
Thank you, Cash. Thanks a lot, Cash. So why don't we take a break here, and Kelly's been managing some of the questions that have come in, and thank you for doing that. Kelly, why don't you read us a question for Cash App from our attendees?
Definitely. Well, we've got some great questions here, and this one somewhat relates to what you were just talking about. The question is, how do you take notes during a virtual audit?
All right, so I'm a little old-fashioned. When I started auditing a couple decades ago, I thought my trainer was old-fashioned, because he used to write on notes on paper, and I thought there was better ways of doing things, like computers. At that time Excel was new and great. Now we have tablets, we have smart screens you can write on and take snapshots on. But my suggestion is, stick with something that you can take offline, take notes. Pen and paper works for me still. Excel files still work, taking notes on the screen works, but it goes to that NDA discussion, or non-disclosure agreement discussion. Some companies allow recording, some companies would not prefer that. Would prefer you don't do that. because when you take a screenshot of a particular document, you never know the schematic of their confidential drawing might be on the background of what you just took a screenshot of. Little things like that make a big difference. So, sticking to minimizing what you need to write down is easier if you just write down what you need to write down. So I think definitely the pen and paper, or some level of whether you might be taking electronic notes, that's fine too. But with electronic notes and virtual audits, imagine me doing this and going crazy on my keyboard, typing away on the same machine I'm trying to audit on. Will probably sound very disruptive, very to the auditee or the attendees. So I try not to do that. So, quiet pen doesn't make any noise. So that's another thing. One of the don'ts, my recommendation is don't try to print out everything, because in a in-person audit scenario where you have paper copies available to you and the auditee is helping you manage their records and procedures and showing it to you and then taking away stuff that's done, when you are sitting in an office and your printer, laser, or fast as it might be, is printing 50, 60 reams of paper, you will have a hard time managing your desk space, your area, and not to mention, going back to confidentiality, it will become your responsibility to print and then consequently shred or dispose those documents because they become uncontrolled copies. So my recommendation is try to stay on point, take notes with what you got or available to you, and avoid killing trees or saving electronic media that might violate disclosure agreements.
Yeah, good. Let's take another one, Kelly. What else do you have for us?
Definitely. Well, a couple of these we're getting lots of questions on this piece of things. So I'm going to go with Glenda's question. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but just want to make sure we've covered it. The question is, do you have insights into what internet-enabled meeting and document sharing platforms the FDA finds acceptable? How about GCP inspectors in the EU? I know there have been concerns in the EU due to the GDPR.
Okay, so clearly somebody knows or has attempted to try to do this in a very specific environment. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer it in that very specific environment, Glenda, but I can cover some of the experiences we have had, right? The FDA is not going to put a technology over the other and say, only use these for virtual audits. Neither am I working for the FDA, which says, okay, the FDA's approved technology is blank, right? So there is none of that. But way I would like to maybe answer this one is how, if you think about the medium and what we are trying to accomplish, whether it be the EU and all the auditing and the area equivalent of HIPAA privacy that goes on, and our requirements here in the United States, the underlying thing is there are requirements. The requirements are for confidentiality. If you're looking at patient information, maybe for patient information or whatever it is that you are trying to protect, the technology has to support that. I'll use a very specific example. Certain technologies that you use for virtual conferencing do not allow screenshots, as an example. So if that is something that is paramount to you, that is something you need to implement or use as part of this. Now, the catch-22 on that is that might not be the technology that might be prevalent in your organization, or might be something that the auditee is aware or familiar with. Think about trying to download a whole new app for FaceTime that you've never used and you're trying to now get set up just so that you can comply with some requirement. So the pre-work, again, can't be underestimated here, needs to involve requirements of what can you and cannot do, and then of course implementing that in the context of what we are doing. With the EU, it's not as big a problem. I'll give an example where there are certain technologies in certain part of the world that are actually banned as well. So doing that research and maybe doing a dry run might be a good idea, because not everything is available everywhere. especially across the oceans. So try to do a proof of concept, a dry run before going to the main audit, because that does make a big difference. And we've had a lot of experience with false starts where we had to reschedule the audit because you couldn't get to it.
Yeah, actually, Cash, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead a couple of slides to this one, because I think this is a question you can also answer, even an example we had over in China. Have you ever used the host company's IT system or tools instead of our own?
Yeah, so yeah, let me just build on that. I think that's a good segue into that one. We had, I'll just use this example. We had a client that was based in the US. We had an agreement to use a technology, Google Meet was the one we were going to use to do the virtual audit. And we had done it successfully many times before, not an issue with the Google platform. It just so happened that when we were doing our due diligence up front for the pre-audit prep, one of the things we found out was, hey, that particular company, or in this case country, China had banned Google Meet, or we couldn't use Google Meet over there. They'd have to use some virtual VPN networks and all that stuff to do that. So the week before the audit, we are scrambling. It's not called a scramble when you kind of expect it. You're finding an alternative technology to use. Now, I believe, ended up using Microsoft Teams for that particular instance, but it was neither used by us regularly, nor was it used by the auditee regularly. So we ended up having to train two parties on a new technology, going back to where's the mute button, where's the camera button, download the app on your smartphone to be able to walk around the warehouse or walk around the facility and do a virtual tour. So we do ask that you go through that exercise, because it sometimes doesn't become as easy as using a client's IT systems or IT tools or ours, or vice versa. Sometimes you have to go to a neutral platform, going to the requirements again. So it's very important. And then I want to add a do on this one, what you should do. Most companies, especially X billion-dollar companies or X $100 million companies, has very strong IT policies when it comes to IT and what tools and remote tools and virtual tools, so that their security, their network is safe. That also makes it harder to work externally sometimes. Example, doing a virtual meeting where you're doing a virtual walkthrough, or if you lose connection, maybe you have to be on the VPN to have access to all these tools versus not. So it's very important that both the host, the auditee, and the auditor has this knowledge and can clearly and articulate upfront what can or cannot be done, so that the agenda can be adjusted accordingly.
Thank you, Kashyap. So we've got about 15 minutes to go here, and I want to make sure that we get through each of our slides. Let's see, can I go back? Well, there we go.
You're muted again. Okay.
Yeah, let's skip through that. Is there a price difference between remote audits and in-person audits, Kashyap?
I'm going to answer this in a very short way, because the pricing usually works with experience, knowledge, training, availability of the auditor. When it comes to virtual audits, you're essentially doing the same thing in a different medium, so to speak. So the pricing doesn't change. Overall, though, the cost of the audit, there is some level of savings from just the travel aspect of it, travel time, being on a plane, airfare, hotel, logistics, etc. So that, I would say, that's the biggest savings in terms of that. Otherwise, it's mostly, you're still paying for competency and ability.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Okay, let's see here. Does the frequency of audits change if a company is audited virtually?
Okay, so I'm going to clarify this question. Is my understanding is, does the frequency of how many times you would audit that company change if it is audited virtually?
Right, right.
You know, most of the times if people are auditing a supplier or companies are auditing a supplier or a distributor or their own internal systems, the frequency is determined by their schedule, by their risk, and the type of scope per audit. So when it's high risk or when it is something that requires a lot more in-depth coverage, maybe the frequencies are higher. Virtual audits and remote audits are different in their nature, so you can't really say they replace one versus the other. The frequency really doesn't change in its nature by the fact that it was virtual an audit. It might be that, you know, a high risk audit is always done on site versus maybe, you know, monitoring audits, as we call them, are done, you know, virtually 1 year and maybe on site another year. So that is all variant on how the audit program set up, but the virtual nature doesn't change frequency.
Thank you. Good to know. Okay, I think this will get some attention. Are facility tours part of the virtual audit, cash out?
It depends on the requirements is my short answer, because sometimes some companies say, hey, my disclosure does not allow you to see everything or maybe potentially record it, so you can't see what we're doing, which really sucks because then you really can't do an audit. On the other side, virtual audits could be scoped, you know, hey, we can turn the camera on when we are in the right areas of the production of your client's material, and we turn it off. You don't need to see everything else. We only show you what we need to show you, kind of deal. So the virtual tours are not all or nothing. They can be, you know, different in a virtual scenario. Unlike when you are on site, you're walking around and you know, you get to walk right by the bathrooms, by the conference rooms, by the team meetings, by all the manufacturing that occurs. In a virtual setting, you can turn your camera on and off, and that may or may not satisfy some of the requirements of the virtual tour. But there is a don't or a caution also that's attributed to something like this. Is I'll use an example of we were doing an audit, and there was ISO requires that a clear communication between management and employees occur on a regular basis. This one company didn't have any records, didn't do any of it. They said we have nothing to show you, and then just so happened that we were walking around doing the plant tour and then consequently going to watch a process, and we noticed a group of people standing in the hallway looking at a whiteboard. In Lean, it was a stand-up meeting. You know, they were doing their daily stand-up, and we paused for a minute and asked them what are the agenda items on that daily stand-up. And clearly enough, they were talking about quality, objectives, standards, where they were going. Hell, they even had my name on the whiteboard saying so and so auditor is going to go walk through. So to me, that showed an evidence of they do actually communicate with their employees, except they don't take pictures of it, or they don't, write that down. Perhaps just having minutes of meeting might be adequate, but it was a big difference between not doing something and actually doing it and not writing it down. So those things could be missed when you're doing virtual tours or turning camera on and off, just to avoid showing somebody something.
Yeah, absolutely. So since we talked a little bit about a facility tour, I know that there's a few questions. Why don't, Kelly, why don't you pick one or two and ask Cash App what he thinks about this next one? Yes,
definitely. So I'm going to combine two questions here. Michael asked a question that I believe you're touching on now. The question is, for audits of suppliers, is it reasonable to have the auditee hold a camera for a walkthrough audit of factory, showing live operations along the way? The second question is from another person who is opposed to virtual tours. And their question goes back to pre-recorded video that someone might submit as a part of the audit? And what do you think of that?
Okay, so I'll answer Michael's question. Yes, it is reasonable if we actually try to have them practice that. I put this out in my do thing. Sounds very silly, but if a company is not used to somebody using AV equipment on the shop floor, having a sign on their chest that says audit in progress, do not disturb, really goes a long way. We've had so many times somebody walking around with their camera or smartphone, and they will get interrupted, rightly so, by their company culture, right? An employee comes and says, did you know that you're not supposed to use AV equipment here? And then at that moment, we pause the audit. The guy has to explain to that individual, we are doing an audit. They have agreement from management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that does happen in a good culture where, they have done their security and privacy training. That should happen on a regular basis. So sometimes you actually have to over communicate that this audit is being done virtually and that the person that is conducting the audit is on the other side of that camera lens, watching what you're doing. So reasonable, yes. Have to be covered in the agreement and the confidentiality agreement and what you can or cannot show. Absolutely. Over communicate the fact that you're doing this virtually. The second question, or the second part to the question, where whether or not pre-recorded information is considered part of it, that is a grain of salt. We try to do the whole point of doing the virtual audit. It's still doing it in the same time period, and it's an assessment of operations as is on the audit scheduled and scoped effort, right? So if day one, day two is when we are doing the audit, we would like it to be, live or, from that era. And the only way to know that is to have it be done live. Pre-recorded material leads to potential misleading. It could be a little biased. It could be essentially a production, which we not interested in watching movies. So we try not to have pre-recorded video. The only time we've actually done that is during process validations or during processes that we need to, assess root cause. So, recording something, producing something, a machine, a molding machine or whatever, to find fault or problems or verify that it's actually working, that we do use recorded video for that. But that would be independent or a different scenario with a different.
So Kashyap, so how would you address that if someone wanted to send you pre-recorded? Give us an example of how you would push back on that to make sure that it was as on-site virtually as possible. Like you said, you want to do it real time.
So like a virtual tour, so we'll use the example of, somebody wanted to show us the production process of our client's material being produced, but it was not, for simple reason, it's not scheduled on the days of the audit. That could be a very likely scenario that happens. And they are like, well, it was going to be produced a week before, maybe I'll record it and show it to you. And that may or may not work because we would have to explain to the client that, okay, if it's not scheduled for that time, perhaps the solution is to schedule it for the day of the audit as opposed to trying to record something and give us a video later, because that can be done regardless if there's an audit or not. The second thing is, if somebody uploads a video, it's not time bound. The details that we look for in an audit are not readily available. An example is somebody's holding a camera, walking to a machine that's producing something. We can get the part number off of it, the serial number that was being produced at that time. We can look up a corresponding record to make sure the operator is, actually signing off on the verification documents and the consequent release of the product. So we could tie all of that together. When somebody's just recording a pre-recorded video, they might not cover the level of detail that we need to cover the scope of the audit.
Yeah, so you just have to let them know that it's as if you were standing right next to them, and if you want to inspect something a little bit closer, they need to be your eyes and ears, and it has to be live.
Exactly, that is a very good example, a very good thing to say. Yes.
Okay, good. So seems like we don't, we can save a lot of money on travel and expense, but why don't we do all virtual audits? And just a time warning, we've got 5 minutes.
So, well,
questions.
Virtual audits are very valuable, but they don't replace eyes, ears, nose, smell, all the senses being on the ground, walking around. You cannot understand the magnitude of an operation if you're not there. You cannot understand the different areas of a production process that you're not there. Especially with virtual, you don't know what you don't know. So when you're there, you at least know, how big the lobby was, to what employees are working there. If you're looking at, hey, is this really 50% employee facility, there's no way to validate any of those information on a virtual audit. You are shown what you're shown. So I think that's one big thing. Risk mitigation. The risk that the report that mitigates with the audit, you can't cover that. Some of the standards or specialty processes, sterilization, you can cover and review records, but you can't review, a lot of the other details that go with that. Test method validations are really tough to do as well, because you don't get to see all the number crunching that goes behind it, etc. And you're looking at through camera. So there's lots of things that virtual audits cannot take over. It can be a substitute for certain things, but not for everything. While you're looking at that, you're on mute, John. But I just saw a comment come in from a couple of anonymous. Seems to be a lot of likes. But yeah, I agree. Virtual tours, people are creative. People use lots of technologies in their daily life, and they will not show you what they don't want to show you. And that is one of those big reasons why on-site is important. Virtual tours are not the same as walking through your own with your own eyes and ears. So absolutely agree.
Yeah, so determining when you do an on-site or a virtual, I know that you were talking about risk often, or kind of tier of supplier. Is that what you've seen a lot of?
Right. A lot of our clients, or we assist our clients to get and look at this based on risk, right? Should we conduct an audit? And, some 20% of the time we'll get the question, hey, while you were there, did you notice blank? They'll ask a question, right? Well, the idea of the auditor is to stick to scope, right? We want to stick to scope so that we finish and in our given allotted time what it is that we were supposed to review. When you're there, you get to see things that you might not have seen virtually. Virtual audits, you cannot do that. So, so it's one of those big differences.
Absolutely. So let's see. Here's more of an opinion-based question, but certification audits. What do you think about doing them virtually?
So Malcolm Solutions does certification audits, for example, ISO 9000. And our opinion is no, we cannot certify you virtually, because at that point it feels like we are just watching a video or seeing some documents and issuing you a certificate, an accredited certificate that tells everybody else in the world that we agree that your operations are in line with all of this. I think the on-site presence makes a big difference, and the credibility is a big deal. So I would say no to that. Can't be done virtually. Portions that can be done, but not all of it.
Well, all right. Kasia, thank you so much for your time today. Your knowledge is beyond just this 1 hour webinar. And I would encourage anyone, whether you were on here live or you're just viewing a recording later, to reach out to me. We'll make sure that my email is in this presentation. Reach out to me if you have questions, if you'd like to connect with me, with Kasia, and discuss any questions that we didn't get to, or if you were not able to ask those during the live session. We wanted to keep this one under 1 hour. We've done that successfully. And we thank you for your time. Kasia, thank you for your insightful comments, and have a great week, everyone.
Hey, thank you, everybody, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that either went unanswered or that didn't get enough of the thumbs ups. We can follow up for sure, or set up an offline time to discuss it further. I would appreciate the input.
Excellent. All right, everyone, have a good week. Take care.
All right, thank you, everybody.